impact of the way we live. Of the choices we make. And see their consequences.
Flames tearing through hills north of Chico, where gusty winds and bone-dry fuel have turned this park fire into a monster.
We are nearing the point of no return, of overshooting the internationally agreed limit of 1.5 degrees Celsius of global warming. We are at the tip of a tipping point.
Essentially, as we go down generations, we're seeing that for the last 2 generations, people are making less money on an inflation-adjusted basis. In addition, the cost of buying a home, the cost of pursuing education continues to skyrocket. So the purchasing power, the prosperity is inversely correlated.
I've not had anything to eat since breakfast. I've got no money to get any food or get any drink. Really hit me now how bad things really are. I've got 20p to my name. That's it.
The last philosophical golden age is often associated with the continental philosophy of the 20th century, with particular emphasis on existentialism and phenomenology. It may not have been said that Beauvoir topped any podcast lists at the time, but the popularity of her and Sartre's lectures were more striking than any current trend. Camus described a chaotic lecture in a title as follows: "Too many attend Sartre lecture, heat, fainting spells and police, Lawrence of Arabia and existentialist." And there's often an emphasis on the uncertainty and social change of the time as an explanation of why philosophy became so popular as it did. The interwar anxiety that characterized England and Europe was described by Richard Overy as a morbid age. And popular titles that are published, as well as the political currents, are concerningly similar to today's trends. Titles such as The Decline of the West, The Decay and the Restoration of Civilization, Will Civilization Crash, The Day After Tomorrow, What is Going to Happen to the World, The Problem of Decadence, and Can We Save Civilization, reflect some of the deep concerns and philosophical seriousness that happened at the time. Nevertheless, we can't claim that nothing has happened since the interwar period. Looking at the larger historical picture, we're now in a time that is considered a milestone in development and progress. Technological wonders, medical breakthroughs, and a higher standard of living create an image of a world that's really never been better. According to data from Our World in Data, global living conditions have improved dramatically over the past century. The global poverty rate has dropped drastically, life expectancy has increased, and access to education and technology has been significantly expanded, suggesting that humanity is on an upward path towards a better and more prosperous future. However, at the same time, it is true that we do live in a time that carries with it a sense of doom. But how can that be? This, I think, is what characterizes our time more than anything else and differentiates it from the previous philosophical golden age. We live in what can be considered a paradox of prosperity, because despite the high standards of living and the outstanding development, cost of living is a top concern for both Gen Z and millennials. A Deloitte survey found that nearly half of Gen Zs and 4 in 10 millennials feel stressed all or most of the time due to economic pressures. Despite globalization and peace efforts through the United Nations, the wars didn't end up ending. On the contrary, new conflicts seem to appear every day, and young people report that they're concerned about war and unrest in the world. And despite the knowledge of how environmental crises can be solved, we're approaching the tipping point of our planet's survival. The condition of the Earth is worse than ever before, and 59% worry about the destruction of nature and the environment. And despite the fact that today we're more connected than ever thanks to technology, we've also become so lonely that the health consequences are comparable to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So, how did we end up with these contradictions? And what can philosophy help with? The paradox between progress and dissatisfaction may be at the heart of the growing popularity of philosophy that we see in our time, because humans seek meaning and understanding in a world marked by doom and gloom, despite great progress. So the only question that remains is what should be the task of philosophy in our paradoxical age? To understand the contributions philosophy could make in today's society, I think it's essential to recall the fundamental benefits and sort of intent that philosophy had to offer. Socrates, regarded as the father of philosophy, famously, of course, said that an unexamined life is not worth living, because he believed that the point of life is about making the best use of your human qualities, finding your place in society, and striving to fulfill a prosperous and flourishing life. This pursuit of a good life is the core question that underlies both Socratic and most of ancient Greek philosophical thought. Today, however, when philosophy is taken seriously, it often becomes a form of word science above anything else, in line with logical positivism, much thanks to the influence of the Vienna Circle. This approach seeks to give philosophy a scientific accuracy by focusing on language analysis and logical clarity. On the other hand, when philosophy is dismissed, it's often accused of being a high-weaving and useless intellectual path to poverty, without any real practical value. In her latest book, What is Philosophy For?, philosopher Mary Midgley challenged the narrow views of logical positivism, arguing that this approach has distorted our worldview by confining philosophy to a purely scientific discourse. She contends that philosophy is not a frivolous or overly abstract subject, but rather a practical discipline that concerns everyone. Midgley asserts that the primary purpose of philosophy is to engage with and organize matters of universal concern. Philosophy aims to connect different aspects of life that may not yet be fully understood or integrated, thereby creating a more coherent and practical worldview. She likens philosophers to plumbers who diagnose and correct conceptual blockages in our understanding. Just as we seldom notice plumbing unless it fails, philosophy also often goes unnoticed until things go awry. This role is crucial in times of social turmoil and uncertainty, and I think that now more than ever we may be in the need of some philosophical plumbing. To understand why, we must first talk about logical positivism and the consequences that this direction had on the field of philosophy and, in turn, on the rest of the world. In the 1920s, a group of scientists, mathematicians, and philosophers came together to form what is known as the Vienna Circle today. They consisted of influential academics who disagreed on a variety of subjects, but gathered around the idea that one could ground philosophy in empirical science and logic, and that one could eliminate metaphysical and speculative claims from philosophical discourse entirely. They called a belief that reality can be reduced to physical units and that everything can be explained by physical laws, physicalism. According to a study done in 2020, physicalism is still the dominant view among philosophers, although there is a lot of resistance to that direction as well. Midgley, in a fierce criticism, accuses the Vienna Circle of being a soul-phobic cult. She believes that the project of removing human agents and souls from philosophy and the world in an attempt to mimic scientific research is not only impossible, but harmful. She emphasizes the project's faults by highlighting Crick's vacuum, a situation that occurs when a serious physicist, like Crick, has to claim that the tools that he uses and refers to actually do not exist. I myself, says Crick, like many scientists, believe that the soul is imaginary, and that what we call our minds is simply a way of talking about the functions of our brain. So, who is this I myself? Asks Midgley. How is it at all possible to talk about oneself in the same sentence that one insists that the souls and selves do not exist? Despite many logical flaws of the philosophical direction, it managed to establish itself as an authority both in sciences and beyond. Midgley points out that the type of emphasis that we allow physicalism to have can only be compared to religious doctrine. People use the word materialist or physicalist just as some of them used to use the term Christian, as a synonym for healthy, normal, rational person. It's now the central example of a compulsory doctrine, something that has to be believed whether you understand it or not. It counts like an oracle. We can therefore ask ourselves whether the reverence that we often feel towards research that we in reality know very little about might not merely be due to the actual achievement of that research, but that it might also come from the impression that this type of knowledge is magnificent and impersonal, safely free from human subjectivity, and that it's an expression of something that is definitely and permanently true. This doctrine has had great implications for most fields of study and for our collective reality and society. It quickly became the norm that even people who study humanities should avoid polluting their arguments by mentioning their own non-scientific ideas or ideals. They should, as far as possible, imitate a real science. And this again had implications for what theories and methods that we choose to use. As Elizabeth Anderson points out in her article, Knowledge, Human Interest, and Objectivity in Feminist Epistemology, we're inclined to choose theories that best match the values and background assumptions that we exist within. She explains that this is the reason why Einstein originally appealed to empirical epistemology when arguing for his theory of relativity, why behaviorism was claimed superior to introspective psychology, and why marginal benefit theory in economics defeated classical theory when the hypothesis could be modeled using calculus, which allowed many economic problems to be solved mathematically for the first time. Anderson points out that in these cases, normative considerations about the conduct of surveys, regulatory limitations on the form of acceptable data and satisfactory explanations, and normative desires for calculative ease were what proved to be strong arguments for the choice of theory. Where the data runs out, values legitimately step in to take up the slack between observation and theory. So within a reality where our value system is logical positivism and physicalism, we have created our world accordingly. Something that points back to what I think is today's irony, the self-imposed misfortune that we're suffering. Because we're not alone because we tried and failed to create social media, or struggling financially because there's a substantial lack of resources and systems that could allocate those resources. We do not see that nature is being destroyed day by day because someone accidentally did so. It is precisely because all of our projects are succeeding that things are going badly and we are left with a feeling of doom. Our projects are a success, and we're reaping the benefits of that success. We now see the results of what logical positivistic doctrine will give us and what it will not. And with Cioran's words, we must not be surprised if men's souls no longer matter much to us. Because it's not for a lack of progress or technology or even understanding and good intentions that we are where we are today. I suspect that it's because we forgot, or more precisely, actively excluded humanity and their souls from our subjects, that we've ended up in a place where people are shocked when an AI produces racist content. As if an AI could ever be anything other than a reflection of the people who created it. It testifies that when we say artificial intelligence, we interpret it as very, if not exactly similar to our own intelligence. And it's not easy to know whether that's because of how highly we regard the intelligence of machines, or because of how much we devalue and reduce our own selves and consciousness to be similar to that of a machine's working. This also applies to almost all other topics. Human ideas and values are at the heart of our laws, our economic models, psychological methods, and our entire world. But everywhere that they are, we want to get rid of those ideas. We want to legitimize the subjects that we're studying, especially within humanities, by appealing to and insisting that on some level they are also cold, hard, inflexible, infallible sciences. But now we have reached, for lack of a better term, the logical conclusion to logical positivism, or at least that a tipping point can clearly be seen on the horizon. Many noticed that the doctrines and the orthodox methods that are guiding their subjects are not sufficient to either explain or address the problems that we're facing today. Historians failed famously to predict the end of the Cold War, economic models cannot explain the 2008 financial crisis, and also in psychology, something is severely wrong with psychological research after it recently came to light that the 96% of the hypotheses suggested in research were correct. This is not something good, says psychology professor Gerald Haffel. It testifies that something is wrong with the subject. Or look at the list of demands that architectural rebellions believe architects and urban planners should include. They want a man-like scale. They want buildings that speak to them and respect the areas that they are within. They want the whole subject of architecture to go away from what they see as soulless architecture to one that appeals to human reason. And this trend of shift is accelerated by what is perhaps the most dire change of them all, the environmental crisis. Everyone knows that the point of no return is approaching rapidly. Business as usual is simply no longer possible. It is no longer enough to refine any risk analysis or make incremental progress within our respective areas of study. It is no longer enough to consider that learning a subject is to transfer finished knowledge and then apply it and never question it. We've come to a point where we're faced with the serious consequences of the systems that we've built, and many of them appear to be suffering serious root issues. But precisely where those weak points of our theories lie is a task for philosophers to uncover, or at least for a philosophical method. Nevertheless, it can still be uncomfortable to include philosophy and humanity in our subjects. We prefer the illusions that these are hard, factual, concrete, numerical truths. And in science, as well as in social sciences, the presence of philosophy in the subject is a painful reminder that things are not as simple or safe as we would want them to be. When Sean Carroll defended the use of philosophical methods to come up with a correct answer within cosmology and particle physics, he could answer that his colleagues often rejected that call. He said a lot of them just rolled their eyes. They're like, really? I thought we'd gotten rid of that kind of stuff. It put me out of the mainstream, but I'm okay with that. Nevertheless, it's precisely through this unpleasant but necessary integration of philosophy that we can reach a deeper understanding and find new solutions to the complex challenges that we're facing today. We have to move away from a linear and specialized way of approaching history, economics, psychology, and architecture. Even sciences cannot always continue uninterrupted. Suddenly, disruptive figures or situations come into the field, like Einstein or an environmental crisis. And they require an entirely different way of looking at and approaching the subject. And a very crucial role in that situation will be finding out what questions should be asked, and thus what direction you should take the subject. I suspect that philosophy is the key in such situations, not only as a plumber solving conceptual blocks between disciplines, but also as an advocate for placing man at the center of our systems and solutions. The creative exploration of complex ideas through philosophy can enrich our understanding of reality and inspire new visions for the future. In the face of today's challenges, from technological advances to existential questions, the multifaceted role of philosophy is crucial in finding holistic and meaningful solutions that include both scientific insights and humanistic values.